Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Matthew Jane, and I am the Learning and Engagement Manager for the State Historical Society of Iowa. The Iowa History 101 webinars, presented on the second Thursdays of each month, explore Iowa's history from pre-statehood to current day. You can learn more about this series and all of our programs on our website at history.iowa.gov. Please remember to sign up for each webinar you'd like to attend, but don't worry if you can't watch live. All presentations will be recorded. Now, a few housekeeping points before I introduce our speaker. Everyone came into this webinar on mute with cameras off. Closed captions are available by clicking the closed caption button on your screen. The webinar is being recorded and will be placed on the Iowa History page of YouTube in just a few days. I have disabled the chat function, but if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A feature throughout the webinar. My colleague, Andrew Clemens, is watching that feature. We'll prepare a list of questions for the speaker at the end of the presentation. But please note we may not have time to get to all the questions. Also, a few days following the program, a thank you email will be sent, which includes a list of additional reading and resources for you to further dig into this topic. And now I'm pleased to introduce our presenter, Dr. Roy Sucholeiki. Dr. Roy Sucholeiki is a neurologist with more than 25 years of experience. He received his medical degree from the University of South Florida College of Medicine and completed his neurology residency at Boston Medical Center. He went on to practice in the Chicagoland area for most of his career and has recently returned to his home state of Florida, where he is now Chief Medical Officer at a startup biotech company developing a treatment of ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. Beyond medicine, Dr. Sucholeiki has a passion for art, particularly art history. His fascination with the 19th century sand art pioneer Andrew Clemens led him to write the Sand Art Bottles with Andrew Clemens, published in 2015, with a fully updated and expanded second edition arriving this spring and now available for pre-order. And now I'm happy to turn over to Roy to begin today's webinar.
Thank you, Matthew and Andrew, and thanks to the State Historical Society for inviting me to talk about who, in my opinion, is probably one of the greatest artists that most people have never heard of. But I realized that probably a lot of the listeners would have at least heard about him, especially if you have an interest in Iowa and Iowa history. But I think it's worthwhile to start how I even heard about this artist. So I grew up in Florida, and when I was really young, I went to St. Augustine a number of times. If you've never been, it's a wonderful little city with a lot of history and museums. And they have a museum there called the Leitner Museum that was formerly the Alcazar Hotel. And then in 1948, Otto Leitner purchased it to house his vast collection of art, antiques, furniture, Tiffany lamps, just quite a wide range of things that he collected in his career. And in the corner of that museum, as I was walking around, I came across two curious bottles of sand art, and it blew me away like very few art objects have ever done. And these are the bottles that's on display. There's not much known about these. In the museum, all they had information is that it was done by Andrew Clemens. They don't know how Leitner got them. It's just part of his collection that he got at some time in his lifetime. And we don't even know much about the individuals that these bottles were made for. And I couldn't find too much in my research. But this struck me like, I didn't think it was possible to do sand art like this. But I kind of tucked that in the back of my mind because at that time, I didn't really have a way to kind of research this. But then something amazing happened in 2003 on the Antiques Roadshow when, lo and behold, someone brought in a sand bottle, and it was by Andrew Clemens that also mystified the appraiser Wes Cowan at the time. But by then, the internet was more developed, and they were able to get some more information. And that's when it piqued my curiosity again to start just finding out everything I could about the man, his art, and the town he grew up in. So his story, though, I'd like to start with his family because his family and him is really a story about Iowa and Iowa history. And it starts with his father, Iowan Clemens. He later went on to call himself John, and his future wife, Margaretha Wolf, were from Germany. And now keep in mind at that time, in the mid-19th century, a sailing ship would typically take a few weeks to make the trip from Europe to the United States. However, because of calm seas, Supposedly, their journey from Germany to America took twice that time. And that's where they met on that ship. And they had what we would call a shipboard romance. And once they got into United States, they went to Wisconsin where they settled for a time and they married in 1852. Then they had six children and they were all boys. The first one was John Joseph. Unfortunately, there's been no photo of him, and he was named after his father and his uncle, Joseph, who was living in Dubuque, Iowa. Now, when they first came to the United States, like a lot of immigrants, they might have expected prosperity, but life was immensely difficult because John was a trained locksmith but couldn't find work like that. And eventually he got work in a wagon making shop and he learned the trade. And that would eventually be what he would do the rest of his life and his career. And he did fairly well. Ultimately, the second son was born in 1854. And then Andrew Clemens was born a little bit after in 1857. So the fourth son, Albert, what's notable about him is that he was interviewed later in his life by Marion Carroll Richmuller, who published a really lengthy article about him and his family around 1941. And that's how we know quite a bit about Andrew and his family and their story. They had another son, Oscar, born in 1863, and finally Frank in 1865. So while they were in Dubuque, this is just really early on. Andrew was about 1 year old. The family heard about a booming town of McGregor, which is located about 60 miles north, and they eventually moved there. Now, Alexander McGregor founded the town in 1847 and just named it McGregor's Landing. And this is his city plan for several blocks of what was to be developed. And then over the next 10 years, it became populated, and the whole of the area, including the surrounding part of the town, was named McGregor. Now, due to the expansion of the railroad and its location over the next 20 years, the town grew quite a lot. And it incorporated the North McGregor into this area and was later renamed Marquette in 1920. But by 1880, the population of Clayton County region peaked at about 28,000, and McGregor's population alone numbered over 5,500. Now, that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but in the following decades, ironically, because of the railroads that started to link McGregor and a lot of these surrounding towns to further places west, the population started to contract. The population dropped over time because it never fulfilled what some people were thinking it would be the next Chicago. But in the last many decades, the population has hovered around 700. So this is McGregor in the 1870s, 1880s on a quiet day, but you can see how many businesses were there. This is on the east side of Main Street. We don't know if this is like a 4th of July celebration or a centennial celebration, which was a huge event for the country in the 1870s. But it goes to show it was a pretty active place. And this is another busy slide of Main Street at that time. They had a train that went through part of the railroad system. Just keep in mind the picture of the engine of the train. We'll see Andrew depicting a very similar image in a lot of his sand art that he would do in the course of his career. This is a bird's eye view of the town. We'll show some pictures later on if you've never been to McGregor and how it looks today. It hasn't really changed a whole lot. Now, if you see in the center, this is the Methodist church that's on Ann Street. The main street where all the businesses were at is in the foreground. It's cut off at the bottom. But way in the back, I just want to point out this little, it's a big house, but it looks little in the picture with the hills in the back. That's the William F. Hunting House, which we will talk a great deal about a little further in. So let me just go back a little bit here. So growing up in McGregor, he was exposed to pretty vibrant town, and it would have he would have seen the two major forms of transportation at that time, which were the steamboats and trains that would bring not just goods but a lot of visitors to the area daily. And uh, many of the visitors would be purchasing some of these sand bottles and bringing them back to their home states. And in some cases, we think they may have even gone back overseas from visiting the United States in their trips. But sadly, at around 5 to 6 years old, he became very ill, and what was commonly called brain fever at the time, likely meningitis. And the family didn't expect him to survive, but he pulled through, and he was completely recovered, except he was left completely deaf. Uh, and early on, he remained at home because the local school wasn't able to give him any education that he needed. And being deaf, his speech wasn't going to develop properly, and he became somewhat socially limited. But his mother was very involved. She was able to teach him to read lips to the extent that he was able to understand relatively simple words and sentences. And by all accounts, he was bright and eager to learn. At some point, though, the parents had been made aware of the Iowa Institute for the Deaf in Council Bluffs. And in 1870, at the age of 13, he went there for more formal education. And the school noted Andrew to be, quote, bright, active, tolerably strong, and very well disposed. I found that a little bit curious how someone would be described like that, but they thought highly of him, and he appeared to thrive there as well. This is what the school looks like today. The front is pretty much the same, but it has grown by leaps and bounds from its humble beginnings. But over the next several years, he attended school there, and each June he would return home, escorted by one of his older brothers to spend the summers at McGregor. And his arrival was much anticipated because they hadn't really had one of their children away for the like a school year before, so it was a big deal, and even for the people in the town that knew them. The family was quite close, and Oscar, one of his brothers, jokingly expressed that no one ever remembered his birthday because that was the date that Andrew would arrive in town each year. But as he got older, Andrew would make the trek to and from his hometown, and then ultimately escorting a younger fellow student who was also from McGregor. Now, at the school, apart from the typical things that people would learn, he developed a lot of carpentry skills. And so when he would come home, he would start to make shelf brackets, rolling pins, baseball bats, and was able to sell some of that. And he created a small business advertising that he could bottom chairs as with whatever materials they were using at that time. But then in 1877, a fire broke out at the school that caused major damage. And by then he was about 20 years old, and he decided not to return to the school, even though they were offering him a chance to teach there. But by that point, we know that he was already making some sand bottles and also selling them. And he also had a side business of doing carpentry work. So when we talk about the region, so you see here in the center, McGregor, Iowa, and then the greater area of Pikes Peak State Park. So he and his brothers would have explored the greater region surrounding McGregor, including the area north, known as Effigy Mounds, and years later, in 1949, it was designated as a national monument. Now, of course, in particular, they would have explored just south of there in the Pikes Peak region. It was named after Zebulon Pike, who had explored the upper Mississippi back in 1805. Now, Alexander McGregor, who, again, he was the one who started the town, he owned that entire area, and later his grandniece donated to the federal government. And in 1935, an act of Congress declared it Pikes Peak and Point Anne State Park, which is further down at the lower part of the picture there. So I'm just going to hone in a little bit. This is just an aerial view. As you can see up here is Main Street. You see how large Pikes Peak State Park really is. And further down is the Pikes Peak Scenic Overlook. If you've never been there, I encourage it. Apart from visiting McGregor, it's a beautiful area to visit. But if you've been there, then you kind of have a sense of what I'm talking about. And Bridal Veil Falls, which we'll mention shortly. And we go in a little bit closer. And that's a little bit. Now, I just want to call attention to just north of Bridal Veil Falls, probably right around here, if you see my cursor, is where a lot of the sand that Andrew and his brothers would collect for the sand bottles, and getting there is a bit tricky, and which I'll elaborate in a second. So the region is actually considered geologically unique, and it's referred to as driftless because it dodged the glaciers of the Ice Age that shaped and leveled the rest of the state of Iowa. And topographically, the most prominent feature of Pikes Peaks are the towering bluffs, as you see here, that allow visitors a bird's eye view of the confluence of the Wisconsin River as it goes into the Mississippi River. The Clemens brothers would often explore the trails and steep terrain around Pikes Peak, making their way to see Bridal Falls. And it's a ledge that's made of 460 million year old dolomite limestone. This is a period photograph, probably around 1910, before it was declared a state park. So the water from Bridal Falls cascades then down to a wooded glen known as Pictured Rocks, exposing the sandstone. And a lot of that exposed St. Peter's sandstone is what it's called, is made up of an array of naturally colored bands and swirls of reddish, orange, and yellows, and some other colors that are shades of those. The rocks, you can chip it, scrape it, and sometimes it can be crumbled into sand. Now, further down from the Bridal Falls, there's a curious shallow cave that's indenting the face of the sandstone wall. And on the picture on the far right, you kind of see as you're approaching where it looks like a cave, but it's actually more like sort of like it's very shallow. But it's thought that it's not really a result of natural processes. Some people think that it could have been ancient inhabitants in that area or Native Americans that may have excavated the site to gather sand for decorative and ceremonial purposes, thereby creating this cavity. 100 years later, Andrew and others were carrying on the tradition of actually collecting the sand from that area as well. Now, the way down to the cave is pretty steep and it's treacherous. The park restricts access, especially after reports of falls and injuries. So climbing and rappelling is not allowed. But what we think is the typical route that Andrew and others probably took was traveling a couple of miles from McGregor on the Mississippi River by boat, and then they would access the wooded unmarked path to the cave. It would take about 15 minutes or 20 minutes to hike to the area. And once there, the cave opening, which is really just about 12 feet wide and rather shallow, allowed access to the naturally colored sands. This is another period postcard from 1910, kind of showing how it looks with the actual visitors there. It looks pretty much the same. It just hasn't changed much, but I like the postcard that was already out because that area was very known and people were already visiting at the time. So a report in a number of newspaper articles, actually, in the late 19th century and early 20th century, many tourists and visitors would collect samples of sand as souvenirs. But there were a few local McGregorites, like the Clemens. They would collect it for making sand art to sell. However, since the region has become a state park in the last many, many decades, you're not allowed to collect or remove rocks or sand. That's prohibited. Also, the park has developed 11 miles of trails that allows ample exploration. Hiking of the trails is discouraged to prevent damage to the vegetation and natural geography of the area. So you can see on the right picture, if you're standing there at the foot, this kind of, you would have to kind of walk up this inclined place before you get to the back of the cavity. Nobody really knows what happened here, but there's a report back in 1877 that two locals went there to try to chip away some rocks as souvenirs, and there was a big part of this inside area collapsed, and one of them was killed, and the other one was injured, but it's not clear if this is part of what collapsed and sort of like an avalanche of compacted sand. This is just a geology of the area. And the only thing that's important to note, it's not really, the slope is not to scale. But if you look down here, you see the sand cave, kind of how it's configured with the rest of the geography. So these are very early sand bottles. Uh, the Clemens family were very supportive of Andrew in terms of helping him. For example, to assist him in collecting sand, his mother made cloth bags that could hold 10 pounds of sand, and his father made a two-wheeled cart. And twice a year, especially in dry weather conditions, Andrew and his brothers would hike over to the Pictured Rocks area and collect enough sand to fill between, I don't know, 50 and 100 sacks in 2 to 3 day period and haul it back. And they said that supply would last for months at a time. And while he used uh, the natural colored stands in the area, as you could see, the array was rather limited. So he acquired sand from other places. For example, he and Albert, his brother, found the whitest sand at White Springs Cave, supposedly located on the western side of McGregor. Initially, for blue, Andrew had to use dye, but later he located a supply of naturally blue sand that worked well. But it's not really known where that came from. It is also thought that over the years, apart from white and blue, he may have acquired natural sand specimens from elsewhere. And upon closer examination of some of the sand bottles, it appears that he may have used crushed charcoal for black. Once he got back into town, Andrew would start to spend a lot of time sorting out the colors. And there was an article published in North Iowa Times in 1930 where Albert, his brother, explained the process. And this is a quote. The colors are in the sand bluffs rising on each side of pictured rocks. To our workshop, we had 42 shades and colors. Water was used to clean the sand, but the bottle and the sand had to be absolutely dry when the work was underway. No paste, paints, or gums or anything else was used. We had a secret process for separating the fine from the coarse, and less than 35% of the actual sand carried home remained in the work. All the work was done with a few fine sticks of our own making. A scoop designed by us was used to place the sand in a bottle. Now, the secret process he mentioned, he, I believe, later divulged in the article by Marion Reichmuller in 1941, where he said they would spread out a particular color of sand on brown wrapping paper and work it around with a spoon and then separate the finest grains that were there adhering to the paper, and that was used for the fine details of the design. So now the tools that were used to make the sand bottles were pretty simple. They were made from green hickory wood, tempered over a candle flame. There was one stick with a small scoop shaped with a piece of tin attached to the end. The scoop could hold approximately a fourth of a teaspoon of sand, and there were two other slender sticks that he would use to manipulate and position the sand grains. There's an authentic set of tools that was once used by Andrew that was donated to the Iowa Historical Society Museum that's on display. I believe it's still on display there. That was back in 1948 by Ray Webb, whose older sister, Ruth, had married Albert Clemens. And Ray and his wife, Gertrude, at the time were accompanied by Elsie Clemens, who donated the George Washington Masterpiece sand bottle that same day, which we'll return to in a little bit. Now, these two bottles that you see in front of you, the one on the left suggested Andrew, he was aware that people generally might maybe underestimate him. So the undated bottle proclaims that such a fine work of art can come from indeed a deaf mute of McGregor, Iowa. Dating the bottle is difficult because it was likely maybe before 1875. Because by 1875, we'll see his work start to become a little more refined. The bottle on the right, the LF bottle, that was done around the same time. It was originally a gift from Charles Fessman to his wife, Louisa Fessman. They were married in 1871. And their daughter, Kathinka Fessman, donated the bottle to the McGregor Historical Museum in 1953. And according to his brother Albert, Andrew never received any formal training in art, let alone sand art, although he was pretty good with carpentry skills. So with rare exception, he either used these conventional pharmaceutical bottles, and we'll see in a minute, these other, what they call inverted apothecary bottles, that when he would build up the image, the bottle has to be upside down, as well as the image being built upside down. So when it's turned right side up, the image would be correctly oriented. These are the tools that are in the State Historical Society. Those are his actual tools. There's one that apparently the brother Albert recreated replicas that he donated to the McGregor Historical Museum that are pretty much the same. And this is the kind of work that he was doing about just before 1875 to 1876. It's starting to become a little more refined. There's a lot of patriotic symbolism in a lot of his bottles that likely started because of that centennial year. Uh, so yeah, just bear with me. I'm trying to, yeah. So the one on the left here is 10 3/4 inches tall. Most of them range anywhere from 5 to 6 inches up to 10 inches. 10 inches at the very high end, but most of them are about 7 inches. So we have more insight in how Andrew made sand bottles because I get a lot of questions about how could he have done that? What was his technique? And it was pretty simple. It's just amazing what he was able to do with what we imagine is just moving around grains of sand at a time. There was a letter that he wrote back to Martha Van Ness because she had ordered a bottle and she was curious and asked him about his art. Now, we don't know the letter that she wrote to him, but the family kept the letter that he wrote back. And a little bit of the background, in 1892, she purchased the bottle. But as far as we know, she had never visited McGregor. And the bottle's provenance, according to the family, was that she saw an article or an ad about Clemens and his work and then ordered the bottle from him. She was born Martha Gerberich in 1862, but she lived in Kaz, Michigan her entire life, where she married William Van Ness. And they lived there till she died in 1947. It's possible that she also saw someone in her town who brought back a bottle, inspiring her to order one. And that's possible given that many bottles were purchased by visitors to McGregor and brought them back to their home states. And additionally, we really know that he was known to ship bottles in the mail. But the thing is that because the bottle that I'll show you in a little while that she ordered is not personalized, it could be that she just ordered one generically from his list of options. So this is the menu that the family kept in their possession. That kind of gives credence that maybe she got this from some ad and she ordered it. And he customarily put a label on the bottom of his bottles, proudly saying, "Done by A. Clemens, the deaf mute of McGregor, Iowa." So I want to go back to the letter here. You may have started reading it, but I'll just read it out. Dear Madam, your letter of the 6th was duly received. In reply, I will say that the sand is pulverized and put in dry. The sand is put in required quantities with a little scoop and then worked into position with a sharp pointed stick. When the jar is full, I put in a cork in the mouth of the jar and press it down with a wood hammer and a round piece of wood. Then I pound the jar on a piece of rubber for half an hour and hammer the cork down every 5 minutes. When I can get the cork down no more, the sand is tight. The work can only be appreciated when seen, and it takes me 2 days to prepare a jar like hers. So what we don't know is how frequently Andrew was selling bottles. Evidently, he was busy enough to make a reasonable living when other income generating options may have been limited for him. In today's dollars, these bottles would cost maybe $100 to $200, which was pretty good at the time, especially when he was actually making these bottles fairly quickly. There is a letter that he sent to his brother. Now, we don't have that letter, but this is a quote that from an article that he says that, let me kind of find it here. He talks about Wednesday next. I hope you will get them all right. Those are the bottles he sent to his brother and can sell them at good prices. When I have no more bottles of sand on hand, I wrote to the party to postpone my going to Chicago till February 1st, so I will have time to finish several bottles to take with me back to Chicago. He was actually selling them as well there. I expect to sell them for 3 or 4 times the price I'm getting here. I'm glad they will give me $25 per week now, which I'll explain shortly. Frank is going to Hull, Iowa in a few days to run a gallery for himself. Sleighing is good here. It's not very cold. I can think of nothing more to write. With best wishes for your health and trusting God is with you. I remain your brother Andrew. So I want to take a little bit time to talk about the lost treasure. So this bottle was described in an article in 1875 that we don't know where it exists. And I want to take a little time because if anybody ever comes across this, it's considered a lost treasure. So the article, and I'm going to quote this, describes the bottle. On Saturday, we had the pleasure of viewing the handiwork of Andrew Clemens, who is engaged in bottling the various colors of sand from pictured rocks. One jar of the sand representing the 40 odd colors weighing 20 pounds. We particularly admired his displaying the skill, ingenuity of the young artist who has arranged the various colors in an attractive artistic manner. There is exhibited a variety of colors in a handsome border, which answers the purposes of a wreath around the neck of the glass jar, leaving the space underneath a pure sky blue, with a darkish hue beneath it, representing the turbulent waters of the Mississippi, over which is stretched a facsimile of the Lawler pontoon bridge and a train of cars passing over it. The young artist does not leave you in doubt as to his design. The picture is perfect in every particular. From the smokestack of the engine is seen the issue of a cloud of smoke, and from the whistle of the issue of the steam, which denotes the arrival of the train on the Iowa side. It goes on to describe it, which is quite extensive of an article, but in the interest of time, I won't go through it. But John Lawler was a very wealthy philanthropist and involved in the railroad in Prairie du Chien, and he commissioned the Pile Pontoon Railway Bridge to be built that was used for many, many years. And someone had commissioned this bottle as a gift to him. And what's notable is that it's 20 pounds, which dwarfs anything that he's made since, except maybe for the George Washington bottle, but even that is not 20 pounds. So nobody knows where it is. I've tried to reach out to some of the descendants of Lawler, which was quite a task because many of his many children had died relatively young, and nobody knows anything about that. And even the town of Prairie du Chien knows nothing of where this bottle could be. It's possible that it got damaged or broken sometime in the past. So again, going back to the centennial year, that was a big time. So that's when he really got ramped up with making sand bottles. So this one was done for Paulina Gatterdam. It was a gift to her in 1876 by a suitor who was ultimately rejected. Later, she married someone else. Paulina was born in New York in 1851 and later lived in Madison, Wisconsin, where she died in 1904. Her descendants donated the bottle to the McGregor Historical Museum in 2011. And that's the other side of it. And this is another one. You could see the kind of look that his bottles had in around 1875, 1876. And this is one in 1877. And this is, to me, a very important bottle because it was done in 1879. And it basically is showing at what point he matured, and the rest of the bottles that we'll see after 1878, 1879 have the characteristic, very refined, detailed look that his bottles are known for. And this one is in the what I wanted to point out is that it has 36 stars, even though the flag at this time had 37 stars. We're not sure why he had 36 stars. It could be that symmetrical and easier to incorporate. So the American flag at this time, like I mentioned, had 37 stars, and he only incorporated 36. The choice, we think, is because it's just easier to make the flag that way. And the American eagle Clemens depict resembles the version of the one in the state seal of Iowa that was created in 1847. Eventually, he would incorporate the state seal into the George Washington masterpiece in 1888. So while Iowa didn't have a state seal, believe it, they did have a state seal, but didn't have a state flag when it was admitted into the Union in 1847. That was because Iowans felt for years after the Civil War that the Stars and Stripes adequately represented all the states. And as a result, it wasn't until 1921 that Iowa adopted a flag, and the state flag incorporated the bald eagle. Okay. Um, while there has been a number of poses that the eagle assumed in various images, the one chosen by Iowa for its flag was coincidentally strikingly similar to the one that Andrew Clemens would often depict in his bottles. So people in his time, and even now, they kind of think of Andrew as a curiosity, the way they look at his bottles. However, there was no indication that Andrew shied away from the spotlight. Not only would he work in the front window of his home where people passing by could watch him, but in 1889 he accepted a challenge to demonstrate his art at several so-called dime museums. One in particular was in the south side of Chicago, where he was said to have received $25, which I mentioned earlier that he was getting per week. And he would prepare bottles while an announcer talked about the nature of the craft. And then after completing the bottle, Andrew would pass the bottle to the announcer, who would break it with a hammer so the audience can see that it was just natural colored sand, proving that the wonderful design consisted only of that and nothing else was in there like adhesives or glue. So it seems like Andrew understood how special and appreciated his art was. He nonetheless priced his bottles quite modestly. It is likely because it's a souvenir and people didn't have a lot of money. He priced it to what the market would bear. He wrote to his brother in 1889. We don't know the original letter, but this is from an article that was published around that time. He said, "My dear brother Al, I received your postcard and letter today, and we are glad to hear from you. My price for a pint bottle with a locomotive and 3 cars is $5. You must charge 10 for it if you can." And you can see that's the price menu from 1892, which is much later. He was charging probably less than that in the decade before it. Okay. Now, so this is Clemens' home and the carriage and wagon manufactory right next to it. This is probably his father. And you see John Clemens in his wagon store. And here, if you look at this gentleman who's standing right next to the windowsill, you'll see a line of sand art bottles. And we think that this is Andrew, and this is probably other members of his family. So let's talk a little bit about some of the sand bottles now. This is the hunting bottle. It's a Queen Anne Victorian home that he depicted. It was belonging to Mr. and Mrs. William F. Hunting. It was constructed in around 1882 and completed 4 years later in 1886. It cost $49,000. Hunting was a wealthy businessman and a grain operator, as well as president of the Hunting Elevator Company. And so the image of the home in the sand bottle is remarkable because not just how accurately it depicts the house, but you can see that the precision of the straight lines and the maintenance of proportion. We think they probably referred to a photograph of the house or perhaps an engraving of the image. It's not known how long the work took to make, but a cousin of the Huntings, Gertrude Daubenberger, said that Mrs. Hunting would often go to visit Clemens every day to see him working on it. Now, the other side of the bottle is an exact representation of the Hunting family crest as it was depicted in a book about the Clemens family, which was published in 1888. Aside from the images of the home and the family crest, Clemens also showcases a remarkable array of the natural colored sands in the decorations above and below, and that kind of resembles the swirls of different colors that you would see in the pictured rocks area. So this is the home as it looked at the time. I think he probably copied an engraving that may have been published somewhere to make it look like this, but it certainly looks exactly like the picture. And this is as the home looks today. It's been restored. It was a time for a time a bread and breakfast place. And this is the exact page of the Hunting family in America that was published in 1888. And you can see he depicted it exactly as what it is in the book, even just the scale and the proportions. This is The Van Ness bottle, the woman who had ordered the bottle, and Andrew wrote the letter back, and you can see how amazing the work is at this point in 1892, and that's very late in his career since he died in 1894. But this is his mature uh, view of when he's master of the sand art. Uh, these are what I consider average bottles. These are typical of what he has made, and I'll show you some that are unusual and extraordinary shortly. The Edith bottle was given as a present to her by Michael Merrill Burns for her 19th birthday. Burns was a widow with two young daughters when he met Edith in Sanborn, Iowa. They were married in 1892. The family descendants donated the bottle that's now in the State Historical Museum. They did that in 2012. The Lena bottle, this is 9 inches tall. It was made for Magdalena Faber from Chaska, Minnesota. On the occasion, the bottle was a wedding gift for her marriage to Joseph Schultz. And the year 1883 on the bottle may indicate when it was made, or perhaps it was an engagement gift. We're not sure. Incidentally, Lena's father, George, built the first brick commercial building in Chaska in 1858. The money he made from the money he made from the California Gold Rush, and the building still stands at 123 Walnut Street. In 1989, the bottle was then donated to the Chaska Historical Society by Jim Faber, a Chaska historian and a nephew of Magdalena. So he basically would depict just about anything. Some images more common than other. The most common are ships and steamboats for the more complex pictures, and often flowers and wreaths. So the bottle on the left was in 1891. We don't know any history about that. It's just owned by a private collector. But I show it because these are the inverted apothecary display bottles. And they range in size from 4.5 inches all the way to 8, 9, 10 inches. And this one has a landscape scene, which is one of the things that you could order on his menu. And the one on the right is a Henry Noble train bottle that depicts a representation of the train that he operated. Although this train, he uses repeatedly that same image. Tragically, Noble died in a train accident in 1912. He was the engineer on the regular engine on the Olympian, which derailed on a bridge over the Coal Creek, a half-mile from Kechelis in Washington State, crashing down 40 feet to the rocks at the bottom. Of the 40 passengers, 5 people died, including Noble and a second engineer who worked at the time helping them. So that's now been in private hands, but we don't know the actual date that was made. So let's talk a little bit about the George Washington masterpiece. So there was an article that was published when it was done in 1888. And I'm just going to read the article first before I show you the picture, which many people, I'm assuming, may have already come across it. Quote, McGregor has an artist nowhere equaled in this world in his line of artistic work. He invented and became skilled in an artistic work, all unaided and alone. He invented and made his own tools. He has thus brought a surprising perfection in art of which he alone is the inventor, the master. We refer to the pictures wrought in sand from Picture Rocks by Andrew Clemens. Our people do not properly appreciate this art invention. The master doesn't seem to realize his exalted position among the inventors of the world. Mr. Clemens lately completed what may be regarded a masterpiece. He has made many fine efforts before. This last one is a perfect picture of General Washington on horseback. The artist has surpassed the copy. He gives the coloring, the shading, form, all complete and perfect, and all done in sand. The work shows Mississippi River steamers running at full speed, a group of Indians in camp, the flag of our country with lettered motto, landscape, sky, mountains, river, fields, and a harvest scene, all perfect and wrought with sand in a glass jar. The jar is opened at the bottom and the work is commenced at the top of the picture. But to appreciate this wonderful, one must see it as we have seen it. It is one of the wonders of the age and ought to have a place among the great artwork of the world. But what I like about that is that he was greatly appreciated in his time. And there were several articles that talked about his work. But then after he passed away at the turn of the century into 1900, he was pretty much forgotten. And other than for the people in McGregor and the local community that knew him very well. But I want to point out some details here. He signs it at the very bottom, A. Clemens, artist. He rarely signed it in sand, but at least he did this for the for this one. This was done for his mother. The piece remained in the Clemens family until 1948, when Elsie donated it along with the tools that he had used to the State Historical Society. She was the wife of Raymond Andrew Clemens, who was one of Andrew's nephews and the son of Emma and John Joseph Clemens, Andrew's older brother. Even years later, there was a report about Andrew Clemens' sand art in the Des Moines Register in 1972, and Jack Musgrove, curator at the time of the State Historical Museum, quoted it as one of the finest pieces of art we have, adding, "You couldn't do better with paint." And that donation actually, I think, facilitated and inspired other people to donate sand bottles, not just by Clemens, but others that followed in his footsteps to try to see if they can try their hand at sand art to the museum, where you can see them to this day. These are some close-up pictures. So if you look at the Great Seal of Iowa that he uses, it's pretty close, although he does some differences. And there may have been different versions of the state seal that were maybe published at that time. I've never found one that exactly looks like what Clemens did. But I will say that what people speculated for the longest time is, did he make this from his own imagination? And lo and behold, he copied this George Washington image from a print that was quite obscure. I don't have it here, but I do have it in the second edition. It's an exact duplicate of the print, down to most of the colors and even the background. And what struck me is how he goes out of his way for the little details that the average person wouldn't even appreciate, because they wouldn't necessarily have seen what he did the image from. And if you look at the columns that flank the pictures, you see the shadowing. So it creates a sense of depth and three-dimensionality. I thought that's pretty impressive. Let me just go forward here. So these are more average bottles. We don't have history on a lot of them. They get sold, history gets lost. But these are typical ones that I want to show. But the blue arrow that I point here is why, I find it curious that he maintains a continuity of the brown band all the way through as like a fine line, rather than just end it and not even bother to actually pull that through to the other side, creating that small border. Almost looks like a framed label picture of the eagle and the flag. These are more bottles. The bouquet, you could see they're nearly identical. So we suspect they were probably done within the same time period. And so he had sort of a standard motifs that he got really fast and efficient in making it, to try to make as many bottles as he can, because the demand was really high. And he obviously wanted to meet the demand because he was making a living at doing these bottles. But I always want to point out that as well put together these bottles were, and how tight the sand is packed, it's not perfect. And occasionally we'll come across bottles that have been mishandled or even shaken, or for whatever reason, the sand is shifted. But it allows us to see that the image is just maybe a grain or two or three deep. And there's filler sand that's in the middle. And that the fine detail of the greens are more relegated to the periphery. How exactly he's building this up is obviously still a mystery, but we kind of speculate a little bit about how he managed this. So this is the bottle that some people may be familiar with, that was shown on the Antiques Roadshow in 2003. Uh, the bottle was a gift on behalf of two friends. We don't know who those friends were. Ellsworth was born in 1938. I mean, I'm sorry, 1838, and he was a graduate of Rush Medical College. In 1860, he was a surgeon in the 106th Illinois Volunteer Infantry before moving to Hot Springs in 1866. Then in January 1873, he married and they started a family. They had a pretty large family, and together they were prominent citizens of Hot Springs, Arkansas. He was an organizer and the first secretary of the Hot Springs Medical Society, and he died in 1907. What I want to point out is, incidentally, his cousin, Colonel Elmer Ellsworth, was the first Union officer killed in the Civil War. And the Ellsworth bottle was ultimately auctioned off in 2020. We could talk a little bit about that. If people have questions about their values, you can Google a lot of, or do internet searches on these bottles and see what they sold for and get an idea of what their market is like now. So these are unusually shaped bottles. These are fairly rare in terms of the bottles that he used, even though the images may not be particularly rare. The one on the left is actually a poem or part of a song by Finley Johnson, and it says, "Forget why remember the wrongs of yesterday. Perchance kind words were spoken to heal the breach today. Then let the past forever be a blank leaf in thy memory." We don't know who it was done for, why that was chosen. It must have had some meaning for the person that ordered it or who received it, but it's now just in a private collector's hands. This is another unusual shaped vessel. I think that this vessel was probably supplied by the family, because I don't think he would have just used this on his own, especially because it's cranberry glass and it kind of obscures the colors. And it was made for this gentleman, Luthi, which in the interest of time, I won't go into, but a lot of the backstories of these bottles are in the book, that if you ever come across it, you can see the full story. And this is only 4.5 inches tall. He depicted animals. This is Carlyle's horse Eaglebird on one side, and he depicts, again, the same image of a train on the other side. It's 8 3/4 inches tall. The train is because James Carlyle was involved in the railroad business and also had horses. These are more animals. Animals are pretty rare, and sometimes they were commission pieces for a particular purpose. So this one is an Irish setter that you can learn more about in the book. And it's also was auctioned off at Bonham's, which gives a little bit of the story behind this bottle. This one has two deer depicted on it. And this one is interesting because he is displaying using more than just one side to the attribution of the bottle, and it shows a steer, and this is for Lime Tuttle, who had a meat market, and that's we believe that this is him in the center, and there's a period photo, and this is from the Rice County Historical Collection. He also did holidays. These were a pair of bottles that were done. They're unusually large. They're 9 inches. They were originally purchased by Mary Walter to give as gifts. The Merry Christmas bottle was for her son and daughter-in-law. And they even had postcards made over the years of this particular bottle. You can sometimes find it on sale on eBay even. The bottle was ultimately auctioned off in 2022. And the one on the right for Happy New Year was in 1887, where both were made. They originally went to Margaret Bergman, a close friend and neighbor of Mary Walter. Bottles to family members are pretty darn rare. So those are always interesting to me. This was for Margaretha Clemens. It has to be her because there's nobody else in the family at that time with their first name initial M. And it was done again in 1876, which has that characteristic look for the time. And then this one was for the wedding of Joseph and Mary. Again, there's a story behind that, but in the interest of time, I'll keep moving forward. These are sweetheart bottles that are made for a couple for different occasions. This is another pair. There aren't too many of these. There are about 3 known, maybe 4 known to exist. This is a Williams and Upham um, River and Harbor Dredge Company depicting their dredge. It's probably from an engraving, although I've never found an engraving exactly like this. But I did find a picture of the actual dredge that the company had, which resembles that. And the bottle is 8 3/4 inches. These are really fantastic bottles that have sold for crazy amounts at auction. And this is for Nicholas J. Gall. And the reason I think this garnered a lot of interest was because of how unusual the images and how colorful it is with the train coming towards the viewer. Also, the signature, how it's so finely done, and the additional two other images on the opposite side that's a bit unusual, and also its size, which is 2.5 inches. And this is Nicholas Gall from a newspaper article at the time, what he looked like. This is another one that was for Captain Lyman Hunt, and I think that he used this particular engraving to make this picture. The only difference is that the image is reversed, so it could be he saw the same ad with the reverse of this because the ship is oriented in opposite direction, and it looks pretty much identical. And that's the ship as it was at the time. The Orin Fuller bottle now is very, very famous. It sold for a record amount. And we have a picture of Orin Fuller as an adult, but presumably Andrew would have copied a photo of when he was a boy, but the family never found a photo that they could say that he copied it. But it sold not that long ago for a huge amount. That's probably the only portrait sand bottle that I know exists. This is for John Beale, who is a band leader. We don't know exactly who ordered it, but it was to commemorate his work in the band. These are other ones. These are later years, 1892 to 1893. You see he reached this as his peak of maturity over the previous 10 years. And this is the last known sand bottle that he made in 1893. And we don't know much of the story behind it, but I do want to point out how precarious some of these bottles are. This one has a crack, and people have to, whoever bought it at auction really needs to be careful and maybe see if they can have that stabilized. There may have been other bottles in maybe early 1894. He died uh, 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 in 1894, but since many of them are not dated, we can't be sure. And this is, there are only a few photos of Andrew being depicted. And this is one where he's with one of his brothers on the left. And this is Andrew on the far right. He's looking a little gaunt, a little lean. He's sporting a mustache. And he passes away, sadly, at May 14th, 1894, at 37 years of age. And we're really not sure why he passed away. Um, there's not really a death certificate. There's a log death entry in a logbook that talks about spinal curvature, but that wouldn't be a reason why he would have died. Could be that he had something pulmonary going on, maybe TB, but there's nobody's really sure. But something was making him ill in the months preceding it because he was looking pretty skinny in that last photo. And that's his funeral notice. So just a quick, this is a period photograph, and this is as the town looks today, pretty much the same. And this is the bird's eye view that I showed earlier and how it looks today. This is the Methodist Church, and just behind it is the hunting house. The locals call it the hunting mansion because it's the biggest house there in McGregor. And this spring, the second edition is going to come out. It's expanded. I've only been able to present just a fraction of works that he has done. And a lot of the stories I wasn't able to present, but just to give you an idea of what he's been able to make and accomplish. So I think we maybe just have a few moments for questions.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you, Roy. You were right up against our time, but I think it'd be great to do a few questions, or at least one or two. So I'm looking here. I want to start off with this question. It says, in what you read, it sounds like his brothers were helping him, and in the letter you read, the brother uses a lot of our language.
but then you talk about Andrew as the artist. So was this kind of a family business, or was he the front of it, but then had others working? I think the question is kind of how did this really exist within the broader dynamic of the family? Because it's clear that his brothers were helping to some extent, but probably weren't the artists.
Yeah, that's a great question. So they were helping him in collecting the sand, and we don't know if it's. I think that the brothers probably made some sand art because there were people in that time, other people living in McGregor that would make pretty rudimentary sand bottles and collect the sand. They would sell them and make some change doing that. And so I imagine his brothers probably did some, but all the bottles that we know in existence, which is I think now it's about over maybe 150 to 200. He may have made up to 1,000. We're not sure. They're all by Andrew Clemens, and we think that maybe what happened is maybe the other people were making sand bottles early on, but ultimately Andrew was pumping these out because that was his trade. That was how, he was the artist. So by and large, it's him.
Super. It's really interesting to think about, like, to hear how his family helped and where they helped and where they didn't. Because we're close on our time, I'll ask just one more question for folks who have more. You had a great link there to the book.
And if
And this
people
one,
want to ask, if they email you, I don't know if that's possible.
yeah, we
Happy to
we
answer
can
that.
forward things on if people have
Yeah,
questions
I'd
or
be
want to have a
happy to.
connection. Yeah, perfect. So we'll just kind of ask this question, and this one is partially. I agree with this question. I'm always curious about moving these bottles, and so this is how did Clemens transport them, and like was it really safe to move them in a time when there were just trains and horses and other more, shall we say, bumpy modes of transportation? What did that look like?
Yeah, so the bottles, by and large, they're really packed tight, as he described. And he also, in many of them, there's like a piece of wood wedge that's hammered in. So it's tight. And there are occasional stories that I heard about people at the time would toss it around and it would maintain its integrity. And they can be shipped, they have been transported. And by and large, as long as they're not hit against something hard so that the glass will crack, they do fine. But as I showed a couple of the images where the glass is intact, but the sand is shifted, it could have happened at some time. I mean, I don't know if he knew that when he created one of these bottles that they would last over 100 years, and we don't know when some of these sand uh, would have shifted, but they tolerate it by and large.
It's absolutely incredible to think, all those grains of sand moving around and bumping or tossing. I'd never heard that, like all
Yeah,
staying
I
put.
think people really need to be careful if they ever have one of these bottles that treat it like, what you would expect.
Hmm.
I wouldn't take any chances and
Right.
demonstrate that the sand is tight and packed in there by moving it around or jostling it.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We have some here at the historical museum. We have a few in the basement where we have them in storage, and I always keep a wide berth. I don't try not to bump them because I can't imagine. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I had heard that eventually they'll be back on display.
That's the hope. Yes, we've had some construction in our building over the last several years, and as you can imagine, with construction comes vibrations and things moving, and so they were moved to a very secure, stable part of the building to make sure that they weren't at risk at all. And so once some of these major projects get finished, there's always hope that we'll be able to have them back on display. But
Yeah, that'd
for
be great.
folks who want to see them, we do offer tours of our storage area. You can make those connections with our museum.education email address, and you're able to see them in those spaces. And so once construction's done, though, we're hopeful that they'll be able to come back upstairs.
Yeah, in the book in the appendix, I list all the known museums that have bottles, and the main ones, of course, is the State Historical Society Museum and the McGregor Museum up in McGregor.
Yeah, and so for folks who want to do that kind of explore, that sounds like a terrific resource because they really are incredible to behold in person when you can come see them. Well, with that, I know we're a little over time. I want to say thank you again for joining us today. I want to send another big thank you to you today, Roy, for being here. It was absolutely fascinating and enjoyed it. We hope everyone will sign up for Iowa History 101 webinars that take place throughout the year. There's so many great stories to tell. For more information or to register for future webinars in this series or to watch recordings, check out our website at history.iowa.gov. And if you're looking to learn more Iowa history in the meantime, you can find and watch over 120 recorded webinars of past 101 programs at the Iowa History YouTube channel. We look forward to seeing you virtually for our next Iowa History 101, which will be on January 8th in 2026. The topic will be Iowa City's Charles Wood Irish and the Dakota Territory Railroad Survey of 1879 to 1881. And with that, I want to thank you all again for joining us today and have a terrific afternoon.